Hello, and welcome to SecureTalk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SecureTalk. I'm your host, Justin Beals. Just a quick note before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that I'll be attending the Gartner Security and Risk Management Summit from June 9th to the 11th in Washington, D.C. StrikeGraph will be hosting a sunset cruise on the Potomac on June the 10th. If you'd like to join us, please use the link in the episode description to sign up. Also, please stop by the StrikeGraph booth and say hello. Thanks. And on to our episode. I'm by nature a very curious person. I'm fascinated by science broadly, and especially physics. Friends often laugh at me when I tell them I have a favorite physicist that I like to read. One of the major areas of research and really new findings and learnings in physics has to do with quantum physics and kind of the quantized nature of the universe and how we deal with that from a mathematical perspective. It all gets really bizarre and mind-bending as you learn more about it, but it is constantly working in some of our most innovative technologies. Much of computer science is based upon our understanding of quantum physics and how we're able to predict certain outcomes in the nature of the universe. Now, of course, this is all getting closer and closer together. You know, we're building computers based upon the literal function of quantum physics. We call it quantum computing. It's hard to describe because the words are both technical and fantastical when you start to put them together. But what we do know is that it continues to hold really powerful promise in what quantum computing can do. And it's not just something that is theoretical anymore. There are quantum computers. We are layering in the error management systems required to function in uncertain spaces, and not something computer scientists like to say. And we are getting very close to a real revolution in the types of computers we build, the types of software we write, and the types of information science that has powered so much of human progress over the last 50 to 75 years. But there's a paradox to all this quantum computing opportunity. The same technology that promises incredible advances in medicine, in material science, and climate modeling also threatens to undermine the very foundation of our digital security infrastructure. And unlike many of our cybersecurity threats that kind of emerge overnight, this one has been developing in plain sight for decades, with not a lot paying attention to it deeply. But of course, we don't think it's an immediate problem. Now, I've heard the hyperbole around security and quantum computing for a little while now. And I, of course, and as a part of the mission of SecureTalk, want to talk to an expert that can really help highlight exactly where we're at and how dangerous or immediate the problem might be. And so we looked for someone that we could chat with, and we're really fortunate to have them join us today. For over 25 years, this individual has been at the intersection of quantum physics, mathematics, and cybersecurity, really translating between these communities and helping prepare our digital infrastructure for the quantum era. What I find most compelling about our guest's approach is his balanced perspective. He's neither an alarmist predicting imminent doom, nor a complacent optimist assuming solutions will materialize when needed. Instead, he's offering a rigorous understanding of both the threats and the opportunities quantum computing presents, and practical pathways towards what he calls cryptographic resilience. Our guest today is Michele Mosca. Michele serves as co-founder and director of quantum risk management company Evolution Q. He also co-founded the Institute for Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo, where he's a faculty member in the Department of Combinatorics and Optimization. Michele was a founding member of the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics and co-founded Software Q Incorporated. In addition to his academic roles, Michele serves as the chair of the board of directors of the nonprofit Quantum Safe Canada and chair of ETSI's Quantum Safe Cryptography Working Group. His work has earned him recognition as a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the Institute of Physics, and the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He received a Commonwealth Scholarship to complete his doctorate in quantum computer algorithms at Oxford University. Join me on SecureTalk as we explore the frontier of quantum computing and how we can secure our digital future in a world where the mathematical problems that have protected us for decades suddenly become trivial. Michele, thanks for joining SecureTalk today. We're really glad to have you.
Well, it's great to be here, Justin. Thanks.
Excellent. As I was researching this episode, I was just totally impressed with your academic journey. As someone that didn't make it past his bachelor's degree, I'm actually a huge fan of great science and good work. Your journey took you from mathematics at Waterloo to being a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, where you attained your doctorate in quantum computing algorithms. And I was just a little curious about how quantum algorithms captured your attention from your early work at University of Waterloo.
Yeah, and it was Commonwealth Scholar, but same journey.
Yeah.
And sorry, the question was how quantum.
How did you kind of first start to engage around quantum algorithms? I'm sure it was a discussion in your mathematics work, but the computer science, the applied side, must have been a leap.
So it was really think of myself as a mathematician. I got interested in cryptanalysis with classical computers in the early 90s. Just as we were starting, like almost nobody knew about it, but we were starting to use public key cryptography to secure the internet. We didn't even call it the internet, but secure global telecommunications and digital systems in the early 90s. And my supervisor not my supervisor, actually, my academic advisor at Waterloo was Scott Vanstone, who happened to be one of the people trying to champion the development of elliptic curve cryptography, in addition to RSA. So I was working on cryptanalysis of other Diffie-Hellman schemes with him. So it was a lot of fun. Got to apply my mathematical know-how. I got to program because we were trying to implement a lot of code breaking. You just have to see if it works and test some of your conjectures. So it was a lot of fun. Actually, I did. Just ironically, in '94, I met Don Coppersmith at Crypto. And Don's a famous code breaker. And I'd read his work and was a huge fan. And because he built on earlier work of Scott and Ron Mullen and others, because they improved some discrete log attacks.
Yeah.
Don saw that and came up with the first L1/3, these attacks that were exponential in the cube root of the key length instead of the square root. And it's because of that. And that was for discrete logs, but then it was generalized to factoring. So both discrete logs and factoring went from attacks that were exponential in the square root to exponential in the cube root. Why does that matter? What it means is if you want n bits of security, you used to need n squared bits of key, but with these attacks, you need n cubed bits of key. Right? And n bits of key means, you have to do 2 to the n work, basically, to break the code.
Yeah.
So you want n to be 128 at least, and maybe 256 if you really want to be safe. And the beauty of elliptic curves is you only need the n bit keys on the order of n, like some multiple of n, but not n squared or definitely not n cubed bit keys to get n bits of security. So it's a lot smaller. It's a lot more efficient to get the same amount of security. And almost nobody cared. But he saw the potential in that and his colleagues. And by the late 90s, it was fundamental in enabling the smartphone, right? Because suddenly you want to put RSA on these very constrained devices with the performance of back then. It was a problem. And ECC was a fundamental enabler, and it became really the method of choice for the US government and many others, because it's so much more efficient, in many ways more secure, because it was not susceptible, if you did it right, to these sub-exponential attacks. The attacks are kind of naive, brute force attacks. Whereas factoring and other Diffie-Hellman schemes, there's ways to start attacking them a little bit cleverly. So that was cool. He was my advisor. I had no clue what was going on.
Yeah.
So I met Don Coppersmith. I knew of his work, and I was like, just, hey, like, what are you working on? And he told me, well, he was helping a colleague of his. Turns out it was Peter Shor, kind of improve or tidy up his algorithm, where you would trap these, you trap these atoms, and you'd shine lasers on them, do exponentiation, and then do a Fourier transform to see the period. And I kind of understood the mathematics, but I thought he was joking.
Right.
I thought he was like, yeah, whatever.
It's very sci-fi sounding.
I thought, I 94, right? And I'd never heard of this before, and I thought he was joking. I accidentally insulted him, and I was like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were serious. And then also Scott also showed me a paper in the early 90s about quantum cryptography, and I looked at it and I said, oh, this is like science fiction, and ignored it. And then when I went to Oxford to keep working on the mathematics underlying communications, again, this damn quantum stuff kept coming up, and my supervisor happened to be at the same college as Arthur Eckert. My supervisor is a famous randomized algorithms person and other discrete mathematics, but they were at the same college, and he knew the physicists could break RSA and ECC easily with this quantum computer, right? And the question was, can you build it? And people didn't know, and they needed more discrete mathematicians to really work on a lot of the problems in the field. But I thought it was like a total waste of my time. I thought I was really into what I was doing with discrete mathematics and Markov chains and all this cool, stuff. Your supervisors, I supervise many students. They often ignore what I tell them, and I don't mind if they end up doing something more interesting than what I tell them. I'm not as happy when they do something less interesting than what I told them. But anyway, I was kind of slow walking this quantum stuff, but he kind of insisted, and he introduced me to Arthur, and I realized, okay, he's not completely crazy. And then he said, well, look, I was very skeptical because I was doing just fine, but they were trying to convince me to work on the algorithmics of quantum computing back then.
Yeah.
And he said, well, come to Torino. There's a group of people, because he was a physicist. He knew we were different DNA, and I wasn't. So he wanted me to meet computer scientists, right?
Right.
That helps, because then we can kind of really cut to the chase and understand each other better. And there I met people, pioneers like Richard Cleve and Peter Shor, Gilles Broussard, who I actually had already met briefly before, but I thought they could explain to me in more mathematical CS terms what we're talking about. And then I was converted. I realized, okay, I was wrong. I met pioneers, on the implementing quantum computing side of things. And I realized this was eventually going to, I learned what quantum error correcting codes. So the pieces started to come together. I realized, okay, this is not a hoax. And I realized I met Dave Wineland, who was already trapping ions back then. He's since won a Nobel Prize for it. But I got to meet all these people. And I realized, okay, this is going to come together. It'll take more than 20 years, but I was in my mid-20s. So I realized this kind of makes it. Let me try it out at least.
Yeah.
So I started working on, well, what else? What can quantum computers do? What codes can they break? What codes can't they break? So I started working quantum algorithmics. A lot of fun. I mean, a lot of this work is still being used today. Actually, 10 years later, I also started work as we had bigger devices that you could no longer manually program. I started working on other elements of the software stack. So in addition to the algorithmics, okay, how do we compile them? Because we had theorems that said, up to polynomial overhead, it'll all be fine. Well, polynomial overhead, that'll kill quadratic advantage if you're not careful, and we actually need the code. So we work on a lot of the elements of compiling, which led to all sorts of cool mathematics problems. So the pure mathematics background was really helpful because, we'd analyze the problem and people would say, like, we have to optimize this. And I'd be like, oh, you need matroid theory there. And then they go off and we'd solve it. They'd say, oh, what about this? I'm like, well, that's a Diophantine approximation question. Like completely different areas of mathematics, right? And we really helped develop the discipline of quantum compilation and quantum software more broadly. So very reluctantly, we got into quantum, but I went through the Schopenhauer phases really rapidly of rejection, ridicule, violently oppose, and then accept as self-evident. So I did that kind of quickly. I did not, it was easy, relatively easy for me because I was new to the field to kind of let go of my old assumptions. Other people who've been living with those assumptions for 20, 30 years, they've been a little more reluctant to let go of their old assumptions, even though we're not throwing them in the garbage. We're really just reinventing and building on those ideas. So I did, and I was one of the first to really be, really excited and interested in cryptography and what we now call cybersecurity, or the foundations of cybersecurity. Because of course, cybersecurity is a lot more than cryptography.
Yeah,
but cryptography is a fundamental piece of it, and quantum computing. So I've been sort of the chief translator between the communities, because the cryptographers like me, just like I was like, this is BS, not worth my. That's everybody's instinct. And I was trying to eventually say, look, I've been there, I know it, but it actually is not something we should completely ignore. And on the flip side, the quantum people feel like, well, fixing these codes that we're going to destroy, well, that how hard could that be, right?
Right.
And I've been, trying to translate the key messages between the two communities for a long time now.
I tell my teammates a lot of times that if you can cross-connect, two areas of expertise, you can really create a unique expertise. I think, your drive from computer science to mathematics and back and forth creates to your point, like a different way of perceiving both opportunities for solutions where other models might have been created that someone like me that just learned to program wouldn't necessarily be aware of. Yeah. Can I just say, I wish that you were my high school mathematics teacher. I complain to this day that I spent hours factoring polynomials, never to understand that they expressed a curve. And if someone had just told me, this is a curve in space, I would have found it the most magical idea. Yeah.
Cool.
You also are leading a company, Evolution Q. Can you tell us a little bit about what Evolution Q, like little of the background and where it's going and the problems you're solving?
Yeah, the background. So even when I was a student and so on, I was always interested. People would ask for help in industry or government. I had fun doing that. So, I love doing the academic side too, but I also, usually back then would have been my supervisor or somebody who would find those opportunities. But as I got more senior in the field, as academics, you get really good at telling other people what they should do, and then most of them ignore it. And then every once in a while, somebody be like, you're making a good point. Can you help us? Right? And I was like, well, I was kind of hoping my talk would be enough for you to get, but sure, So I was doing consulting opportunistically. I didn't look for it, honestly, but I was really just trying to, very passionate and saying, look, I'm doing my part, right? I'm studying how to break the codes. I'm figuring out how to fix them. But there's a lot of stuff you need to get ready for. And, and I go off and do it. And of course they wanted help. And so it was so important that I would try, but it kind of got too much in the sense that, it was not work I could do on my own anymore. And it's concretely, the CIO of Canada asked me once, what should I do? And I told her, well, your team should get together with my team and we should do blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, great, let's do that. Of course, I didn't have a team, right? So I had to go put a team together. And then I went and I met talked to my colleague who's an expert in quantum communication, and then started talking to the friends I've made over many years in industry and saying, look, who are because I do the top and the bottom of the stack. Like I can do the fundamental mathematics, I can sell the ideas, but then what all the hard work in between, I knew I couldn't do that. So I needed security engineers and people who could really analyze the systems and all that. So we started a professional service. We need to set up a company because we can provide a lot of the niche expertise, but we really need people who can help us do a lot of the work and let us help more people.
Yeah.
And better if we had a team. So we started putting together a team. We're like professional services company, basically. And one of the first services we defined was a quantum risk assessment. Because we realized, as you know, in cybersecurity, the hardest part is not the technology problem. And the more we frame it as a technology problem, the less we succeed. And so one of my wise friends from government said, if I were on the customer side of what you're trying to do, I'd want a threat risk assessment. So I could justify whether I really need to worry about this, convince my upper management, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great, you can lead our quantum risk management. So we did those things, and it was around 2020. And we always, despite being academics, we were pretty pragmatic and well-grounded. So my founder, he was at the company that built the first quantum cryptography product about 20 years too early, right? So we knew intuitively what product market fit was and what being too soon was. And so we're very customer focused. And while we had strong views on what works and what doesn't work, what people maybe should do, we're also very pragmatic and have to meet them where they are, right?
Yeah.
That's the critical thing that by luck, I've always been lucky to be at the interface of the people who are building on the research. So if you want to do something together, you kind of have to meet them where they are. And so in 2015, nobody was ready for quantum. Well, this is before the NSA announcement that we started the company. So almost nobody cared about it. We did, but I was also very aware that almost no one else does. And I was trying to get people excited, and occasionally I would succeed. And it was heating up enough that I thought it was time to set up a company. And then the PQC stuff really started ramping up in 2015 and 2016 or so. Again, I've been working on this effectively since 1996, and part of the rogue academic community who cared about this. But we said, look, we're gonna, what's your business plan? Well, our plan is to help people and then come up with a plan, because we obviously wanted to be a product company or not. Like either we're going to be a successful product company or we'll just stay a services company. But we obviously wanted to be a product company, but obviously we need a product that actually created value and that we could do better than anyone else and that people wanted the value that it would create. And we started seeing it around 2020 where all the quantum innovation, which is starting to heat up more and more and more, was spawning more and more investment in building these quantum networks to do quantum cryptography, to achieve, these awesome, key exchange functionalities, which the practical cybersecurity world profoundly did not care about. They totally ignored it. And if they paid attention to it, it was to cheap shot it and explain how useless and pointless it was, which I found not helpful at all. Like I found that culture clash not constructive, but there was money being put into it. And I believe, I knew where this was going, right? Because but there's this problem and that, I'm like, we know, we know that we can solve every one of those problems and let's give them a chance to solve them. On the flip side, just achieving the physics, the technology side, you've only done 10% of the hard, you got to do all the other stuff. And so we kind of architected, again, we've been working on this along with others in academia for many years. Let's look at where the puck is going. We have these networks. How are we really going to, because these one-off gimmicky POCs where you manually grab keys from your boxes, put them into a video chat and say, hi, if I say, I want that on my 10,000 node network, you're not ready to do that. So we really architected a simple, elegant way, what we call the quantum delivery network, to turn these heterogeneous point-to-point links into what, to the application layer, looks like a fully meshed network. But in a way that was, sound, cryptographically sound, efficient, scalable, interoperable. You don't have vendor lock-in at the hardware layer and so on. So that was our first product, which is really coming more from the innovation quantum world and bringing it one really, really important step closer to being a useful cybersecurity tool. And then that was kind of the first product. And the second product is really, I'll just fast track it, a way to achieve this, the same sort of end-to-end key exchange, but without quantum technology. And that was really for people who couldn't care less about quantum networks, but they wanted resilience, right? So maybe I should have, to sum up, we really realized the way the world is heading, we don't just need scalable security for the internet, we need scalable resilience. Right? In the 80s, we didn't really protect the internet. Nobody even knew what it was, and it wasn't protecting, there wasn't a lot to protect.
Yeah.
In the 90s, when we decided we're going to use this for finance and government, well, we need to make it secure. And by the late 90s, it was clear PKI is the way to get scalable security, because you took all of the pain in the ass part of, securing communications, which was out of band, key exchange, managing the keys. Like, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
To do it scalably, then PKI does a lot of the out of band stuff in band. Not everything, as you know, there's certificate authorities and anchors of trust, but a lot of the heavy lifting is in band. It was a fundamental enabler of the last 30 years of economic growth. So it's sort of its own success meant it's now an existential threat if this stuff is broken. So the stakes are higher, the threats are fiercer, and Shor's algorithm is not what worries me, because we know about it.
Right.
I've been working quantum algorithms for 30 years. We actually don't know what they're good at, right? And now combined with AI on the ingenuity side, and then if you do break something, how quickly you could exploit it. Like, one natural reaction would be to panic, right? But you don't need to. I think you just have to do the same thing we did with authentication. When passwords stopped being, they worked fine for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But then we relied on them more. Adversaries got better. We just started developing multi-factor authentication. So we knew we needed some sort of MFA type approach. And there's really only, there aren't that many magical ways to exchange keys. So we took the symmetric key approaches. We think sort of symmetric key infrastructure, as we're calling it, is really the scalable way to achieve two things. Resilience through defense in depth. Of course, defense in depth, you need diversity. If your authentication is, I'm just going to have 2 passwords, that's not going to help. There's layers, but the more different they are, the better. And I know they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but that's kind of the Swiss cheese model of, as long as the weaknesses are different, you get a really stronger outcome. And so the SKI approach, which again, quantum networking and QKD is kind of like the biometrics, or it's like kind of it's yet another mode to add so we can have this cryptographic resilience. So let's just prepare it and embrace it and use it when we can, and we'll be able to use it more and more, and it'll be cheaper and so on. So in addition to the resilience through defense in depth, it also, the cryptographic primitives of symmetric key cryptography are considered more robust, right? Because it's one-way function based. It's not, like, to get that magic of in-band key exchange, there's a price, and they need some mathematical complexity, which I love, and I think it's great, and we should use it, but it's more complex. The symmetric key primitives are generally considered less risky from a long-term security perspective. So applications really needing long-term security or very, very low risk tolerance, the symmetric key techniques are useful. They're helpful addition to the public key method. So this is a new category, because up until recently, who cared about cryptographic resilience? Now, when we're seeing quantum makes it viscerally, concretely real that these codes really can be broken, and 2 of the NIST shortlisted candidates were broken. So the idea that they probably won't be broken, but it's not probably bet your house on it. So you do need that additional resilience and defense in depth. So we saw this new category emerging, and that's where there was a product opportunity, because it didn't exist. So it's not like, this existing people just do it. No, they're busy trying to catch up with their PQC migration. There's really an opportunity for newcomers to create this category.
That's exceptional. One thing that I think is really true, and you mentioned it, we've seen this in computing or networked computing over the era in which we've been operating, is that we're finding new applications for these tool sets. And then security has to keep up with, we want to use the internet for government and finance, right?
Yeah.
And certainly I think that I'm curious where you see the state of quantum computing as a solution, from a computing perspective broadly. What do you think the state of this the computing tools are right now and its best applications?
Yeah. So it's way, way ahead of where we were 30 years ago.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
A lot of people like to harp on, well, it's still not at this level. I'm like, I know, but I've been, where I was in 1996. In 1996, we had a proof of concept, that we can correct quantum errors, right? And it was basically a theorem that said if A, B, C, D, and E are true, and we knew they were certainly not going to be true, but they weren't completely ridiculous, then with some completely absurd overhead, we can actually correct errors.
Yeah.
And practical people said, oh, but that's not reasonable. They'll never work. I'm like, look, from impossible to nearly impossible, that's a big leap. And then over the next 10 years, guess what? Those assumptions were removed or improved. The error rates are improved. We got nearest neighbor, because one of the assumptions was every qubit can instantaneously or like within one clock cycle talk to any other quantum bit.
Right.
And we're like, I don't know how to do that. And so what people realized, they found a way with just a nearest neighbor, like a mesh, and you only talk to some nearby qubits, you can actually tolerate like a 1% error. Whereas in 96, it was like a 10 to the minus, like a 1 in a million error with all sorts of unreasonable architecture assumptions. And so we came a long way, and we've had other leaps and bounds just in the last 5 years with another family of codes called low density parity check codes. So we've orders of magnitude closer to this. And we're now, if you think of all the stages to get a cryptographically relevant or commercially useful quantum computer that is fault tolerant, large scale, we've come several orders of magnitude. We're in the last one or two phases now. And we're now in the era of fault tolerant quantum error correction, where we're validating at very substantial scales the hypothesis that quantum error correction actually works.
Mm-hmm.
Like we knew it would, but that was really extrapolating what we knew, not just saying, here's the results. But now we have 3 different platforms. So it's not like one platform did it and we're like, oh, no one else was able to recreate it. You got the ion traps, neutral atoms, and superconducting qubits are doing massive hundreds of thousands of physical qubit experiments, validating that, look, you do error correction and you reduce the error rate, and use a bigger code and you reduce the error rate more. Like those are the kinds of things they're showing. It's still early days, but we've come a long way. Now let me step back maybe 5-10 years. Back then we crossed once we had close to 50 to 100 physical quantum bits with a low enough error rate, you could do some completely artificial tasks nobody cared about that would take astronomically more resources on a regular computer.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of validated the hypothesis, and we reached a point where I couldn't say, well, I could just do that on my laptop, right? Now, finding something useful to do with these noisy intermediate scale devices, some people will argue, oh, we found some useful commercial applications, and then maybe they are useful. Like I've not done due diligence on many or most of them, but I think it's fair to say most people don't believe these are massive, wealth generating applications just yet. But I think it's a very valuable R&D tool at the very least. And I don't want to rule out because serious people are saying, no, we can use a quantum computer to get us, to train our neural networks at same quality, but much lower cost than a supercomputer. Mm-hmm. So who am I to tell one of the largest banks in the world they're wrong? But so some people are finding these applications. They're not economic game changers just yet. But that was not fault tolerant yet. To me, the most important application of noisy intermediate scale quantum bits is implementing error correcting code that you can scale up to many qubits. Now we are soon reaching the regime, like soon I mean in a few quarters, where we'll have more logical qubits than we can simulate on a classical computer. So that'll be a whole other era that we're in. And honestly, once we're at 100, it only takes 2,000 to 4,000 to start breaking public key cryptography. And we have to keep in mind, like, you don't have that many bits of security, right? The gap between, like Shor's algorithm is very efficient. So it's not like, oh, I just add another 100 bits to my ECC key and I'll be fine. It's like, well, no, like that doesn't, it's a polytime algorithm. You don't get, there's not 100 bits of security gap between having 100 logical qubits and having 1,000 logical qubits. You're scarily close. Like we look at it as an engineering challenge. Oh, how much does scale this up by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000? But 1,000 is like 10 bits of security, right? I mean, just loosely hand waving here, and somewhat comparing apples and oranges, but just trying to, the analog, it's not that much of a security buffer, the one we're used to in cryptography, between what the codes we can break, the key parameters we can break, and those we can't. We want an enormous gap today. And because quantum algorithms are so efficient, once we have a few hundred or even 100 logical qubits, we're tremendously close to quantum code breaking. I'm not sure I answered your question about the useful applications, but I think what I want to say is quantum code breaking validated, there is a and then finding the use cases, honestly, very few organizations have been trying very hard. So some are, but a lot of them are hyper-focused on NIST and short-term wins.
Yeah.
And guess what? Many of them are not getting some massive ROI if you're measuring it by, how much money so I think the short-term breakthroughs and ROI we should absolutely look for, but I think we need to take a longer view, look at what fault-tolerant quantum computers can do too. It's the same journey. You got to find the problems, see if there's at least an asymptotic possibility, and then see if you can optimize it and achieve it with a small quantum volume that today's devices can do. So it's the same exercise, but I think if we renormalize our expectations and realize the potential impact is astronomical, so we should be happy with a small probability of success to justify exploring it. And it can be rapid, right? Sure, like we went from zero impact on RSA to it's broken. It wasn't incremental. So I think businesses need to do that, and more are doing that. Again, too many are probably looking for the easy, quick win, but it's not a spectator sport. You need to get your serious R&D, your R&D teams engaging with quantum computing experts.
Yeah. I have played with some of the programming tools. It's my favorite interface for understanding how something works a little bit. It's my old lever. And, definitely as I think there was a system that I was playing with that would allow you to put in more classical programming, and it would translate that classical style programming to something that was more an optimized way you might program a quantum computer. And of course, I remember the days where I had to set aside a memory space for an allocation and reference it and stuff like that. And just moving from like and/or modalities into quantum decision matrices reminded me of the switch into data science, where all of a sudden I wasn't dealing with kind of something I could rely on, this value is in this memory location, but something that was a probability. And I feel like both our hardware and our software, when we think about AI, are kind of moving on similar tracks, and they will conjoin at some point and support each other.
The hardware and the software?
Yeah. In that, we have these quantum computers that are probabilistic, we're setting a bit, or there's fault tolerance issues or error issues, and we need to think about computing on more probabilistic terms than completely fault tolerant terms.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think Well, there's a whole stream that tries to, like, what are problems where the noise and the, maybe isn't so detrimental, and we can still get some advantage. Yeah, yeah, or where, I mean, there are probabilistic algorithms too. So there is a stream that tries to, leverage the quantum coherence we have and still and look for examples where the noise doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
It's not hard, to be honest, but I think not a lot of people have tried to mature that. And there's an example I know of with algorithmic cooling, where ideally we'd like this coherent, basically quantum data compression algorithm to help cool or reduce, increase the polarization of our bits. So this is one use case is magnetic resonance imaging, right? And ideally we want this perfect error-corrected data compression, but we found a way where, even if there's some noise, it'll still cool the system, and you'll get more polarization and a better image with weaker magnet, all the good stuff we want.
Right.
But found an example where you didn't need perfect, coherence. Yeah, and I mean, it's funny with quantum computing because on the one hand, we're working with the low-level stuff from the 60s and 70s, circuit description languages, but then we have all these amazing, fancy, insightful new tools with functional program, whatever it is now, we call it nowadays. And these two worlds, I mean, you need smart people who kind of figure out, well, where do we want to, where should we still be doing it the old way, but how can we leverage the last many decades of insight and software engineering and so on.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to see the field mature. And they're even looking at, okay, so I have a quantum processor alongside my GPUs and blah, 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 blah. Like, how do I stitch these together to solve my business problem? So they're even looking at the software platforms. Because when you go beyond POC and you really want to use it in real world systems, and you want it to be efficient and like, I don't know of any quantum algorithm that doesn't need fast classical processing. So it's always going to be integrated with fast classical computing, FPGAs, and whatever else. So we do need to anticipate how are these architectures going to converge and run together. It's not my area of expertise, to be honest. I've done the compilation, the building blocks of efficient compilation, but I've mentored and seen other people try to stitch it all together into a real usable platform.
Yeah. So NIST here in the United States National Institute of Science and Technology has been, working on selecting some post-quantum algorithms for standardization. And, I just love your thoughts on how that process is run, and also, how the outcomes have looked to you in trying to develop some of these security tools.
I think they've done an amazing job. They stepped up. So first of all, they've been kind of preparing. They were, getting some internal know-how and experience, and they are having workshops before the NSA announcement in 2015, requesting the standards, because really standards should be developed because people need them. There were serious users and authorities who wanted these standards, and NIST stepped up. And it took 9 years to come up with the first steps, right? And that worries me. I mean, but I don't think they could have gone faster. So that's where we need to keep that in mind, because what about the next time? Are we going to have 9 years after somebody asks for it? It just took many years for them to decide to make that decision. But I thought they did a really impressive job of engaging the global community. Like, a lot of the work was done abroad, outside of the U.S., but U.S. showed leadership and vision. So everybody put a lot of effort into the game. It wasn't the U.S. did everything for the rest of the world, but the U.S. did bring a lot to the table in terms of leadership and expertise. It was done in a transparent way, so people kind of trust it. So I think to me, that was a success story, and that we did come together, and many players contributed, came up with trustworthy algorithms. There's still a long way to go. Obviously, under the current efficiencies and so on, the team is going to be strained in terms of capacity.
Yeah.
But we're all hoping there's enough capacity to keep this important work going, because it's most important, obviously, for the U.S., but the rest of the world. And they really played a valuable role in convening global experts to really work on this common problem.
I love how they did it in a very open way. I think you and I would agree that we like the fact that we can allow the broader, marketplace of ideas to pressure test some of these security concepts, that there's not a lot of security and secrecy, actually. Yeah.
I mean, trust, we need trust, but you need trustworthiness. And the process was really fundamental in getting a result that people would actually trust.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, we always ask about the future a little bit, Michele, and your impression of it. I feel like, of course, quantum computing from a computer science perspective is, I think, a big part of where the future is. And then your focus on the securitization of both the systems and the networks and the data we provide. But what worries you? What are you excited about as you think about maybe the next 3 to 5 years? I think sometimes we look too far out. It gets very hand wavy. Yeah.
Well, one thing that worries me, but there's a positive side to this, is like this so-called quantum threat. Like we're not, most of us anyway, working in quantum computing, we're not building it to try to break anything. We're trying to harness all this amazing possibility to create new materials that make the world better and like create value and solve important problems for humanity. Just so happens it breaks these codes. In the grand scheme of all our security problems and cybersecurity, I guess you can't really draw a line between cybersecurity and security. And this is one of the really simpler to understand and resolve ones. And there's, I would say, clear market failures in how, why did it take so long? And many of us really pushing the rope, nobody was paying us to. We were just doing it because we're passionate about it. Instead of doing our day job, so that's not a great model for resolving really important problems. And it was just, you see all these mismatches where a lot of enthusiasm to create the problem, but then there's a gap right between the problem it creates and where the cybersecurity world is to be able to meet it. Because cybersecurity is drowning. We're failing in cybersecurity. I think it's getting worse, right? So, so saying, but they'll just magically, in addition to what they're already dealing with, they're supposed to prevent this potentially massive catastrophe that quantum. And it's whose job is it to? Because most of the quantum strategies, or a lot of the proponents are it's not our problem, or we have the NIST algorithms now, no thanks to us, but now it's resolved, right? It's
right.
No. And whose job is that anyway? And so why are we failing? And then the other gap was, but quantum creates this new key exchange capability, which is amazing. Imagine a world where there's end-to-end quantum entanglement. Why wouldn't you use it to do exchange keys? And yet, there's a gap to trying to get into a real, usable, scalable, certified product. So a lot of boring stuff that not many people want to do. And it's who's in charge of that? Right? Again, I don't think it makes sense to say, well, you guys who are drinking water from a fire hose, defending against today's threats, can you figure that out too? They're obviously not. So there's so many different kinds of gaps in policy and in risk, in sort of innovation policy, economic, industrial policy, but also risk governance. So why are we, part of it is, I think, because cryptography is invisible. When it was somebody with a briefcase, it was an explicit physical product or company doing the cryptography, it'd be in your risk register somehow, right? You'd see the concentration risk. You'd see the supply chain risk. This is a mathematical algorithm sitting there. We're not saying, oh, but wait, somebody who can solve a math problem can basically hijack that critical dependency in our supply chain, and it's systemically owned by an adversary. I don't see our risk models properly modeling and character, like dealing with that
Yeah.
in a responsible way. So on the one hand, I'm very worried. On the other hand, quantum has now shined a light on this in a way that I call a blessing in disguise, because it's bright enough that for them, we're, kicking and screaming, but we're kind of seeing it and acknowledging it, and hopefully by mitigating, it's triggering kind of an immune response, and the new sort of frameworks we're now going to use to handle the so-called quantum threat, if we do it properly, if we take advantage of this, don't just kind of quickly slap a Band-Aid on it, now please go away. If we get into properly managing our cryptography and just identifying what were we missing in our risk governance, right? What was it? And let's fix that. I think we will be much better positioned to deal with a lot of the unexpected challenges of the future. And again, scalable, cryptographic resilience is one part of making things better going forward, but I'm sure there's other things that we're understanding and addressing as we go forward.
One thing that definitely resonates with me, Michele, is I think of all the people I've talked to in the security industry broadly, everything from physical security to security leadership to cybersecurity, is that almost everyone feels overwhelmed. And they are kind of drowning in a sea of challenges, and a lot of times feel like they're treading water more than making real progress. And I think that we should be sensitive about looking for tools, to your point, that solve all those problems instead of effective practices and building a capacity for it. I think it's just the best way to set up for a positive result. Yeah. Michele, this has been amazing. I really appreciate it. Obviously, your expertise is fun and given me an insight into a space that I love learning about. And so really grateful for you spending time with us.
Well, it's been a lot of fun chatting with you, and I hope it's helpful, to your listeners as well.
Yeah.
And as we're all, we all have some role in making the world, more secure and safer place to then also seize all these positive opportunities. So I hope it's helpful and interesting for them as well.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody, today, and we'll see you next week.